Lottie, and it's been a little while since we've done a reading wrap-up. I'm so sorry about that. This is something I'd like to try and keep on top of and do monthly, but you know how it can be sometimes. So today we will be going through all the books I read in January and February. It's a fair amount to cover in my opinion, 5 books in total. I guess it isn't a lot, but still, I kind of hate reading an even amount of books as well in a month. But I will just have to live even though it's been totally eating me alive. So before we get too stuck into the recaps and reviews, I want to quickly say that I am trying a new rating system this year. So if you'd like to hear more about that, stick around till the end when I'll go a bit more into depth about how it works, why we're using it, and how I feel about using it so far, as I do have some thoughts and opinions. Starting from the very beginning in January, I only read 2 books. I was sick and kind of an unhappy little bear, to be honest. The first book was a fantasy, with the second being a YA contemporary. With so few books, it meant we actually had quite a high star rating of 4.5. So I guess you could say we're starting the year off strong, even if light. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett ended up taking nearly the entire month to read, even though I did thoroughly enjoy it and ended up rating it 4 stars. January was just a bit of a struggle in itself for me. That was all. Since this is the second book in the trilogy, I will try to keep it as spoiler free as possible, so forgive me for the sparse recap of the plot. We rejoin with Emily and Bumblebee back in the Cambridge University. However, they have appeared and are seeming to be attacking only Wendell specifically, with another strange and mysterious figure who seems to only talk to or be seen by Emily in tow. Emily knows something is definitely going on, that these are definitely unusual circumstances, even for her. Even for someone who studies dryology. Is that how you say it? I haven't read it in a few months, so I've forgotten the specific terms, but I hope you guys know what I mean. This chain of events is what leads the pair to embark on another adventure to find a door to a fairy kingdom. Accompanying them will be another professor, Rose, and Emily's niece, Aradine. Aradine? I think it's Aradine. Sorry. Together they must find the door for the attacks to stop. All the whilst, Emily must figure out how to help this mysterious figure. Yet in typical scholar fashion for Emily, none of this is quite as important as her current project of creating a map of the Fey realms. Sorry if that sounds rather vague, but I don't want to spoil the first book for anyone who hasn't read it yet, because it is quickly becoming one of my favorite series, and I really recommend it if you like maybe a more in-depth cozy fantasy with no spice. This is like one of my top fantasy series currently. Please read it. I love it so much. I want to start by saying that I continue to love the writing style that Heather Fawcett has for this series. It is written as an academic journal, and so that means we are given footnotes as well, which really lends themselves to the world building without it coming across as like a lore dump. I'm not sure how she does it exactly, but I am always so pulled into this world. I could so vividly imagine the snowy Alps of Austria that we had as a backdrop, or those dark forests we'd sometimes find ourselves in. I could even imagine Wendell's classroom, which we were only in for a short period of time. The best way I can describe her work is it brings me back to reading fantasy as a kid, where everything just feels so magical and you are truly losing yourself in these worlds. Even the world of the Fae, something we know Emily, among other scholars, have a hard time recording because of the magic in their world and the magic that they use altering the perception of things. That world was something I felt myself being inside of too. I just think that's such a testament to her writing, to be able to have a character in a world so disorientating, like the Realm of the film, and be so hard to describe, but to still have your readers be able to just picture it so vividly and feel like they're there too. Just something to add on in terms of the writing style is that we do on occasion get that very special chapter from Wendell's point of view, and boy, I just love how he is written as a character. He's a special man. I I love getting to read his thoughts on Emily, his thoughts on the situation he's facing, and seeing what he holds as important. It really is just some of my favorite parts of the book. It fills my heart up with so much joy when I get to see the textile change. He feels like a completely different character to Emily when you read his point of view. Again, I just think that's a bit of a testament, because sometimes you can have characters who are meant to be wildly different, who do just end up sounding the same. Not my two scholars, no, they're special, they're different, I love them. Putting all that aside, I do quickly just want to talk about the characters quickly, because I do love them, as you can guess. I love how grumpy and work-faced because Emily can be, as it means we can find ourselves in these new and sometimes dangerous situations without ever feeling upset with her decision, as you're on this hunt for new information together. Between the two books, it is so obvious that the relationship has changed and grown and gone forward in time. It didn't feel like we hit pause after the first book, which is something I feel like can happen between books and series. You can just see it in the way they are talking and interacting with each other, and in small situations like they now have offices next to each other. It is so obvious that they now have this relationship forming between them, whatever they may label it as. Now, a critique I do have for this book is that I did not feel too strongly towards all of our side characters that we had this time. I had a really hard time connecting to Rose or Aradine. I actually keep forgetting her name, to be honest. I do find it disappointing too that I never got to feel close to the villagers like I did in the first book. I had found myself really rooting for them all, just not so much in this one. I really couldn't tell you anything about them, and I think that might just be because we do spend a significantly less amount of time within the village they stay at. The locals in the first book seem to have quite a large role to helping Emily, so it was just a bit disappointing here. I do also want to note that I think me having a hard time connecting with the characters might also be in part with the style of writing, because whilst I don't think Emily would be considered an unreliable narrator, it is definitely from her point of view. So with a character like her, it can be quite biased and introverted, with her not always caring for the social side of things. So it felt hard to get to know some characters like Rose, who she very obviously didn't like from the start. However, in saying that, I did thoroughly love the Foxfay companion we saw joining us. There's a good chance that I would just always love them, but this one had quite a specific kind of like sassy nature about him that we sometimes come to expect from the Fae anyway. But it was just something about this one's personality that I loved. He was very different from quiet and timid Poe. Despite everything I loved about the book, a large downside for me was the sheer amount of traveling we do and the state Wendell is in for a majority of the book. To be quite honest, I'm still not sure how I feel about it despite having read it months ago. I'm just not sure how to speak about it without spoiling it. The best I can do is maybe put it down to the pacing. We had a very, very strong start, but then we hit this really large dip and dome. It's kind of a lull that did seem to just carry on for a fair portion until we got back to the ending, where we regained that pacing and speed that really hooked me back in, as it felt like nothing really came together until the end. I do think though that this held me back from that utter need to always be reading and to always be turning the page, which is probably one of the smaller reasons that it took me so long to finish, and maybe even the reason it wasn't a full 5 stars for me. I know the overarching goal of the plot had to be completed in a very specific way. I'm trying to be really vague here, and it's a slight struggle, but it just felt like the realization for it had come a little too late in the story. I hope I have explained that all in an understandable way. If you've read the book, can you tell me if you understand what I mean? And my last thoughts on this book was that I never questioned the logic or the choices we were making. Despite trying to figure out fate logic, it never had me like internally screaming at the book that the characters were being dumb. We've all been there, don't judge me. I mean, There was one time when I was like screaming at my book because I wanted Emily to realize something large about the situation, but she did. And then I realized I needed to calm down because it was just a book, a work of fiction. It wasn't quite that serious, but it felt serious at the time. But with all this being said, despite how bittersweet it will be, I can't wait for the last book in the trilogy to be released. I have already ordered a paperback copy, which I think is meant to arrive in the last half of the year. Whilst I'm so excited for another installment, it is the final installment as well, which means leaving Emily and Wendell behind. Despite the very soft spot I have developed for them, I'm just not ready. But it does also mean hopefully we get something new from Heather Fawcett one day, because I'd really love to see what else she can write. See, I told you it's totally bittersweet. My last read in January was actually a reread, and the book was Solitaire by Alice Oseman, which I did end up giving a 5-star rating to. The book just has such a deep place in my heart. This is the only one this year that I didn't use my new rating system on. I don't remember why though. Starting with a bit of background, because this one is a reread, as I said. This is a book I read way back when I was around 13 or 14, I want to say. And I don't think I'd go as far to say that it changed my life, but I do think it deeply affected me at the time. I couldn't tell you what it was anymore that made me fall for this book, but it was one of those books that made me want to be a writer as a kid. It made me want to keep up with an author, to find out more about them and the work. I think it might have even been the reason why I got a Tumblr account so I could read Hardstopper as she posted it. Back when, I don't know, they were posting it on Tumblr. I don't know if they still do. Also, I remember her trailer for Radio Silence. I thought it was so cool to have a video trailer for a book at the time. I ordered it as soon as I could, even though I never did end up reading it, but I still have the copy because I thought it was so cool to have a visual trailer for a book. Putting backstory behind, Solitaire, in its simplest form, is about a girl named Tori who is really just going through the motions of being 16, going through A-levels and uni applications and being depressed, but the way I interpret it is perhaps in a way where maybe she doesn't know or realize she can be. I think it might be quite relatable that sometimes it feels like one day you have just woken up and you are sad, and it suddenly feels like you have always been sad. Now, Tori must face the fact that there is something called Solitaire, and even if she pretends not to care about it, it seems she does slightly. She most definitely does not care about Mike Holden, like, at all. Like, no. The book revolves around Tori and her relationship with others and the world, and if she can figure out this blog she doesn't really care about. I do want to preface, this is not like a mystery novel though, it's YA contemporary. I know this book has a lot of critique when it first came out for not having trigger warnings. Some parts have since been revised, meaning we won't touch on those topics because I do not own that original copy. I do think though, when I first read, because I read the original copy first, because it was in my school library, it made me feel like having depression was in a way okay, and that I'd get through it eventually. That being said, this is something they wrote when she was like 17, and the writing can feel quite obviously like that. Not at all in like a mean or harsh way, it just reads as a book a 17-year-old wrote sometimes. I don't know how to explain that, but I do not mean it in a mean way. This is another one that just feels so bittersweet to read. Even though I've read it a handful of times now, I think it has in part finally solidified in my head though that I no longer relate to Tori in the same way I once did. When I first read the book, whilst it is a good thing I no longer relate to her the same way I did, it is weird because along with that realization comes the crushing one that I'm an adult now and I will never be waiting to get to Tori's age or be Tori's age again. It's just a strange feeling to have. I do like that I relate more to Michael in a retrospective way now. It feels good. Because I love Tori, but I don't want to feel like the way Tori does anymore. And that's a wrap up on January. See what I did there? Because we're doing a wrap up? Yeah? Okay, moving on to February, where my reading did start to pick up a bit more, but not massively. I read 3 books, a romantasy, a horror western, and a cozy contemporary. One big book talk book, and one of my very own anticipated reads from 2024. What a month it should have been, and yet we ended the month with a whopping 2.5 average star rating. How disappointing! It wasn't good. I'm gonna rip the band-aid off immediately. No sidestepping this one. I read Fourth Wing. Did not care for it. Did not think it was that good. I do not understand the hype. 2-star read for me. But this is just me. This is just my feelings. I guess we can start with the plot and move on to characters and so forth. If you're like me and like to live under a rock, it just seems safer to live in my own little bubble with cozy games and other books. Sprinkle in a few movies and TV shows and we're grand. It just seems safer. Yep. For those who don't know, Fourth Wing is about Violet, who is forced into the Writer's Quadrant instead of becoming a scribe. Something that she has been going her entire life believing she would become. An entirely different life within the Writer's Quadrant. You graduate or you die. There is no in between and no way out. There are fewer dragons than ever to bond with the sheer amount of cadets, and so Violet, being so small and fragile, is now the #1 target for every other student, because there is no point having someone so useless around. It is a known fact that dragons would never bond with someone like her to begin with. Now, every day that passes, the war outside continues to rage on, and she must find out how she will ever survive this place and the life that awaits her after graduation. So, on principle, I don't think the plot sounds that bad, honestly. Perhaps not the most original plot, but it doesn't sound bad, yet the execution of it was just, it wasn't there. I think I might have a lot to say about this book as a whole, so I'll try and keep my thoughts organized and start with the characters. Now, quite honestly, I don't have a lot of thoughts on them, to put it simply. I did not ever foster a deep connection with them. I found Violet's character to be specifically rather annoying, honestly. I understand she is meant to have some kind of chronic illness, however, the way it is dealt with and spoken about just wasn't it for me, because it is just a constant string of reminders of how small and tiny she is, but it never goes any deeper than just the physicality of it, leaving it all to feel very surface level. It wasn't like her chronic illness even mattered in the end. It was just like, she just overcame it somehow. I just think maybe if we're gonna have a character be chronically ill, maybe they should stay that way and not just magically become better. I say this because in the end of the book, she just suddenly has all the strength to be training and doing better in certain classes, but yet it's never explained why she can suddenly be doing all this. I feel bad saying this as well, but I didn't care when she got hurt. Like, I never felt that, oh no, what happens now feeling you get sometimes. It is just so sad that Violet is written to be like this, because she could have been this great character. She cares so deeply for those around her. She's smart and cunning and can use her wits to get through pretty much anything thrown at her. And despite being chronically ill, she never lets that be the reason for her not trying. And so it just hurts a little that on page, she was lacking all that depth she really could have had as a character. Now, as this isn't part of romantasy, you'd think maybe I'd care about our love interest way more than I did. I don't know, it just felt so obvious who she ends up with that it doesn't make sense to me why we had two love interests to start with. I feel like maybe Zayden ended up being the most developed character in the book. He wasn't just some brooding evil bad guy. He did have a bit of dimensionality to him. Maybe? I think that primarily comes from seeing him grow as we learn about him from Violet's perspective. Saying that though, I would have liked to see him just absolutely punt her across the room so we actually got that feeling that he did indeed hate her like we were meant to believe. I can see why we didn't, because then it becomes a very toxic relationship, but I don't know. I just thought it would have been funny, because for two enemies, if you can really call them that, is yet again, there was a lack of depth. It really just felt like a my parents hate you so I hate you kind of vibe, when the author had everything there and ready to go deeper than just that. Next in my notes we have Dane. Never really became more than a cliche childhood best friend, and I think that just made him so plain. In some ways it was like his character only existed to remind us how fragile Violet was meant to be, as that was all they ever spoke about, how he was gonna get her out of there. He did serve as a good way to showcase Violet's need to at least try and prove that she could be more, but it was just every time he was on the page, he was like, I'm gonna get you out of here. Oh, I didn't like it. I did like his character in the beginning, but he did quickly become boring as well as annoying after a while. If I may talk about this, there's a scene where something that happens with him that is meant to shift our feelings with him and add more depth to the story, but I feel like it wasn't hung around / spoken through enough to have the impact that was intended. Like, you could have forgotten the scene by the end of the book, which again takes away from his character and what his character could become. As for the rest of the background characters, they really are just sad background characters. I wanted so badly to get to know them and feel involved with this small friend group that was being created, but I just never got there. I don't remember any of their names. I really thought we might get that fantasy school feeling, but they just never became people to me. I'm sorry if this is a spoiler, but it is graduate or die. That's the whole premise. I think it's fair to expect death. For as much as Violet cared about the deaths of people she didn't know, the death scenes felt so very rushed through. I understand you have to move quickly in this school, in this world, but it just would have added so much more to her character if she tried to hold on to something of theirs, or even just silently grieve those she'd lost. Like a couple of 50 pages after or so, you know? Have it be her small act of rebellion or something, give her that extra layer to her character. I don't know if there's a reason for her to be rebelling, but like, she's been forced into this school, into this life against her will by her mother. Surely that's a reason enough to rebel in a slight way. I will say now though, I really did enjoy the dragons. I thought they were fun and I liked the banter that they could have between one another. They did actually feel like creatures, like living things. I'm happy with the way they were written because they have their own personalities, which I thought was quite nice. It was a bit of a surprise too because I didn't know that they were going to be included as characters, I'd guess you say. I'm glad they're not just like things, they're not just a dragon, if that makes sense. Each dragon got to be unique. I love them so much. They made the book worth it to me in some regards. Another gripe I had though, kind of a big one too, and this may be quite a spoiler, I'm sorry, but Jack is a very disappointing antagonist who could have had so much more potential if more was done with him. I just wish more had been done with Jack, honestly. It just become tiring to see him just be threatening or standoffish at most. I wanted to see him do some real damage. I know he did in a few instances, I think, but to see it with more weight behind it, for him to feel like a very real threat. I wanted Violet to be in so much more danger in his presence. I was also expecting him to last a lot longer than he did. I have my theories about him, but we'll skip. My last note on these characters, they're all meant to be adults, like in their 20s. I kept forgetting. I kept thinking they were like 16 or 17, at most maybe 18. No, they are all young adults. If that doesn't say a lot about the writing and their own interactions, then I couldn't know what else to say. I can't. Except, I do know what I could say, as I have a whole bunch more in my notes for this book to go through. And we're not stopping at just the characters. Because another problem I had with Fourth Wing was that I never got swept into the world for the most part. All I could really imagine and picture was a super duper generic looking cobblestone school, and as a whole it was just really lacking any kind of atmosphere. I mean, it never felt like the supposed tension of the world sat in until about 200 pages, but even then it was just, for such a high stakes book, it just never quite felt like anything mattered. Something that I really didn't enjoy was that there felt like a bit of a lack of world building as well, and when we did get it, it was just Violet info dumping because that was her way of staying calm, and it felt like you were just being bogged down with all this information, and it became hard to keep track of, and I got confused. I know I have a small brain, but like, come on, I feel like I'm pretty good at keeping track of this kind of stuff. I'll be honest here and say I wouldn't know how to write it or how I do it, but I just don't think the way it was done was very good from a reader's perspective. And despite there being a map in the very front of the book, I had no idea where I was at any given moment or what territories they were talking about, and it was just one big pile of mush for me. I was confused. I never want to be mean when I'm critiquing writing, however, something about the way that Fourth Wing was written it never clicked in with me. As you can probably tell already, I found it to be pretty lackluster, repetitive. You know, as I've already said, I found some of the characters to be fundamentally annoying. As bad as that sounds, I just couldn't root for anyone or even tell them apart from one another. It got to a point where it also felt like maybe even the author, Rebecca Yarros herself, didn't care much for what she was writing, and I wish I had just bookmarked examples, but some passages felt like they had just ended rather abruptly, or the day would just stop, but in a very clunky feeling way. Like, it didn't always seem like a natural closure. I also want to throw in that I am just not a fan of modern day language in fantasy, and I guess this book just really taught me that. It's not something I ever thought about before, but oh my god, it was very apparent. There is a battle scene that was messy and confusing, and honestly, it had me falling asleep, which should not be happening during a battle scene. Oh my god, I was falling asleep at one of the most pivotal points of the book. All in all, this left me with no real desire to keep turning the page, and I really wasn't invested until like 200 pages in, and even then my investment would be wearing thin sometimes. I also want to throw in, I did not care for the spice, but that is just me. I'm not taking points or anything, don't worry. It just wasn't for me. Spice never typically is. I wasn't aware it was gonna be there. Also, again, maybe spoilers, but there was a plot twist at the very, very end that I just did not care for. I think if you're gonna do something like that, at least drop some foreshadowing into it, maybe. I don't know, create some low-level suspicion, give me a reason to care about it instead of just going, oh, okay, and then closing the book and never, like, thinking about it ever again, except when I write this. I mean, like, okay, I see this series going one or two ways, that they either stay in school or go to war early, yet surely they can't stay in school. Based on the writing in this first book, the next two will be incredibly dull if she did that, because there is just not enough happening to warrant two more of the exact same thing. And I don't know if it is said in the book, but I'd be assuming the first year is the hardest and with the most depth, so what could really happen in the next two? Like, it's a 5-book series, right? So they go to war early in the next book, and then what happens in the other 3? Spice? Is it just that? Someone who's keeping up with the series, let me know what's going on, what's occurring. I want to say this as kind of a closing thought for Fourth Wing. The fact that this book was so popular kind of felt a little spoiled for me, and having known it was a series took a lot of tension away from it as well. But then in saying that, I also knew that A Good Girl's Guide to Murder was a series, Hunger Games, Caraval, Once Upon a Broken Heart, they all had tension to me in varying degrees, but I still felt worried about the characters. The choices they make, they felt weighty and heavy, and this book just never quite got there for me. Honestly, this is not a series I continue with, nor would I see myself rereading it. Okay, so this next one was a 2024 anticipated read that I had major high hopes for. I was really looking forward to dipping my toes into a Western. I thought this was gonna be a lot more fast-paced and action-heavy than it was. The nicest way to say it is it kind of fell flat on its face for me. This is the first book in the year to get 0 stars from me too, which is super sad that it happened so early in the year, but let's just hope it is the only one for a while. A quick disclaimer, I guess, before we go on. If a book has some kind of content that I really don't like, I'll give it 0 stars just to be petty. I'm not sorry. I'm very petty and dramatic. That's just who I am. Sometimes it is a serious 0 stars, though, and this one was a serious 0 stars. Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian is a Western horror, most simply put. It is about a ragtag group that form together to find and kill the witch Sadie Grace. Along their journey, they will encounter many horrors that they need to survive, all of which are worse than the witch herself. Yet the bounty is too good to give up, so they are ready to risk it all or die trying. I guess this is another one where we can start with the characters and go on from there. I hate to say it, but this was definitely another one where I just thought the characters had a real lack of substance. Maybe that's because we don't particularly spend much time with any of them in mega amounts of depth. We spend a lot of our time as an outlooker on the group, but also kind of dancing in Rose's perspective. Occasionally we do change point of views, but it is mostly from Rose's. They all just really seem to have been lacking goals, if we are being quite honest. Old Tom the Witch Hunter seemed to be kind of a front runner for the group in a way, as his goal was to kill the witch and collect the bounty. But even then, it seemed he didn't really care that much. Joe Mullins kind of had a solid goal as well, but he kind of just drifts through the story, if we're being honest. He's there to follow his wife, yet because of the way he is, the goal is kind of loosey-goosey. Ned and Moses are cowboys, have no goal except to just go with the group, and that's about it. It is so blindingly obvious they don't care, which makes it hard to care about them. And lastly, we have Rose, a retired school teacher turned farmer's wife, who is there to look after Rabbit, the character you kind of forget exists. Then we have a whole bunch of side characters who are thrown in, but again, we have a bit of lack of depth with them, so despite them being meant to be seen as a warning of what's to come for our group, they just never quite fulfill that purpose. I know they're side characters, I know, but they're side characters with a purpose is my problem. They're meant to serve warnings, but there's no tension to them, or they don't feel scary. This might be a spoiler, again, I'm so sorry, but is it the Wild West, and is it a Western unless this character is present? It might be expected, but we have a character who is meant to represent the devil or something akin. Black toads are used as representation, but I couldn't find that as a link to anything aside from Beelzebub. I think is how you say it, but I don't think that's who we are referencing. If there is some kind of link between Toads and the devil, let me know. That'd be an interesting read. But the character just never made sense to me other than as like a final boss, if you will. I don't know. I just thought the devil might be more menacing. He kind of just lacked any kind of fear you'd expect to feel from such a character. I don't get him. The book as a whole, and I think this just comes down to the writing, it wasn't as scary or nearly as fast-paced as I thought it was gonna be, and maybe I'm just so disappointed in the book because my expectations were high for it, but I just didn't think there was much tension to it. I was never entirely sure where I was. Maybe if you're from the US or have a better understanding of the geography, you'd be fine, but I had a hard time picturing the scenery, which direction we were going and where we were. And another massive gripe I had with the writing is the sheer amount of animal gore in it. It was just that, honestly, to a point, a bit sickening. Yeah, I have soft skin, whatever, but it was at a point where it just felt like the author was doing it to be classified in the adult genre, because if you took some things out of this book, it definitely could have passed for YA in my opinion. Every single animal that dies or is killed is done in the exact same way. Well, like copy and pasted same kind of thing. I get supernatural forces are meant to be at play here, but like, I don't know, there's a line and maybe I'm just a big baby, but I was super uncomfy about it. Like, not every single animal we need to come across needs to die, okay? Not... Oh, I'm sorry. I also want to say that slurs were used, and I do understand that it's an old style western and that language was used in the time frame, but we're not in that time frame anymore, and they just felt really unnecessary, and I don't think they really needed to be in there. I don't think they ever really need to be. The points would still have been made without them. We can show racism and hear how evil a character is without going full out with it, and if you can do that, I think maybe you're a better writer than if you need to rely on them so heavily all the time. Anyway, looking at this book objectively, I think the plot could have been pretty decent. I mean, I was super excited for it. It was a book I pre-ordered after all, but there was just no punch to it. The scariest part for me was Railway Town. If you've read it, you know what I mean. Yet, even that could have been scarier. I could have had a lot more tension there. Please. I'm so disappointed with this one. So unfortunately, despite this being an anticipated read of 2024, it just wasn't it for me. And I don't feel like I'd pick up the book or his work again, quite honestly. Although I will say I did enjoy Sadie Grace's overarching storyline. I think it could have had more depth or gone further, but I liked her perspective, and I think it had good commentary on how a lot of the time witches were just women who did not fit in with society. This does go beyond that with supernatural use and magic, but it had the underlying message there, yet at times it still kind of missed the mark on what was trying to be said, but I did like her storyline. Okay, so we are actually onto the last book for this video. I'm sorry I've kept you all here so long, but I hope you guys enjoy the semi-in-depth reviews instead of just a little like, yeah, no, eh. So I started reading this one right at the end of February, and I knew I wanted something that I could finish before the month ended. And whilst I think I do have a couple of other shorter books, this is the one that was speaking to me the most. Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa got 3.5 stars from Despair because it was quite the comfy, cozy, laid-back kind of read that it is definitely known as being. The book is about Takako, who unfortunately has just gotten some pretty heartbreaking news. Her boyfriend is about to get married, and to one of their co-workers nonetheless. As difficult as it would be to keep going in this workplace, as you can imagine, she does end up quitting her job, living off her savings. It isn't long before her uncle, a man she hasn't even been in touch with in years, reaches out and offers for her to live above the bookshop he owns, provided she does the odd shit here and there to help out. Without much of a choice, she takes it. working at the bookshop, it isn't long before she falls in love with reading and she is able to start and heal and change. So despite this being a novella, I was pretty immediately sucked into Takako's story and life. I was immediately attached to both her and her uncle Satoru from the get-go, but I'll be honest, the side characters in the story, I could take or leave them. I think this is just because it's so short and we don't spend much time with them. But Takako, she just felt so real to me. She was a very real girl whose unfortunate situation is quite believable, and I think that's why I got so sucked in. I could see why she was hurting the way she was and why she was closing herself off and making the decision she was. Hell, I'd probably leave my job too if that happened to me. I'd be out the door. As for Satoru, I really like his character too. It felt like he really did care about Takako, and whilst he is written to be kind of not necessarily an eccentric, but maybe something along those lines, a bit quieter, he never felt too much or that he was overbearing or taken away from her story in general. I really fell into the atmosphere of the book. It just felt like I was in that small and cozy bookstore too, and it just hit every expectation that I had for the book. The writing was just so calm, and I guess we could say emotionally charged too, perhaps. Although I do think some of the dialogue and interactions between characters read a little odd. It wasn't necessarily clunky, but just maybe didn't flow right. I'm really wishing I had bookmarked some examples, but I think the issue may be because the book has been translated, and you get this with any and all kinds of text, that some meanings get lost or it just reads different because you can't exactly translate word for word. I will say though, the book never felt rushed, and I really enjoyed that. I liked how simple the plot was. It just seemed to work really well with being a novella and the writing style the author had. Even though it might sound like a boring plot, I never got bored or needed a break from reading it. Now, despite saying that and putting all the enjoyment I had whilst reading the book aside, once the book was down, it was down, and I wasn't too fussed about picking it back up again. I'm someone who reads every single day. I make a point to do so the book was always going to be picked up and finished at some point, but it never felt the overwhelming urge to make time to read it. I wasn't looking for a spare 5 or 10 minutes here or there, and I'll be honest, I haven't had a book like that in a while, but I think this is perhaps where we started to drop stars though. I will say the first half did have me crying in the first 50 pages. I want to talk a little about the last half of the book now that revolves around Satoru and his wife, even though it is told from the perspective of Takako. She does also have her main story going on, and what we're talking about in a way is kind of a side story, if you will. But I didn't care too much for it. I wasn't particularly fussed to find out why she had left him to start with, so I think I already had some problems engaging with it. But I just didn't like her character. She does have a very sad story, and her reasoning for what she did does make sense on some level, but I just have a hard time sympathizing for her in regards to the relationship. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of glad we got to see Takako be mad with her. That felt very self-assuring for me. So all in all, I could potentially see myself rereading this book again, and I'd recommend it if you were looking for a cozy little novella. As I said at the very beginning, we are now going to talk about the rating system I've been using very quickly. This was my first time using the Core Power rating system. I think I will continue using it because it definitely made me think about the books much more deeply in some ways that perhaps I didn't do before. One of my biggest fears when it comes to reading is not catching the full story or missing out on those small details. So this seems to have me really looking at the text I've just read. It became pretty clear to me at the very end of last year, I was reading purely just on vibes, and I knew I was doing that, but it wasn't cutting it anymore. I always felt in a way very unhappy with the way I'd rate things, yet without knowing really how else or what else I could give them, I definitely think it might need adjustments, but I'd love to check in with this at the end of the year to see if I'm still enjoying it. If you aren't sure what Corporal is, it is a rating system made by the Book Roost, who has made multiple videos on it that I urge you to go check out. Each letter in Corporal stands for something different. Characters, atmosphere, writing, plot, intrigue, logic, enjoyment. You score each section out of 10, divide it by 7, and then you have your rating. Sometimes with books like fantasy or where world building is kind of important in general, I like to throw that one in too, so I think instead of dividing by 7, I will separate the two W's and adjust the margins for a rating. Then we have Pile too. So that is all the books I read in the first 2 months of the year. I'd love to hear what you guys have been reading, and if you have any recommendations for me, so leave a comment below. If you haven't already, consider subscribing and liking the video so I know you guys are enjoying it. I hope to see you bears somewhere else in Bear Town. Bye bye! Even for someone who studies dryology, dryology? Is that how you say it? Dryology? I forget. It's been a few months.